Thank you. Good morning. We will wait just 2 minutes for every participant to enter the room. Welcome to the B20 Global Dialogue between Saudi Arabia, B20, and UAE from Argentina. Okay, we will start now. It's 10:05, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to the B20 Global Dialogue. B20, as you know, is the voice of the private sector to the G20. B20 represents the global business community across G20 member states and all economic sectors. In this event, the policy recommendations of B20 Saudi will be presented focusing on the following task forces: trade and investment, future of work and education, energy, sustainability and environment, and integrity and compliance. Following the honor of driving the B20 process in 2018, it is now our goal at UAE to provide continuity to the good work done by Japan in 2019. Our distinguished speakers lead each thematic task force and will focus on the main landmark agreement reached by the more than 1,000 participant companies in the B20 Saudi. We will devote 12 minutes to each task force, and then we will have a short Q&A presentation. This Q&A session will happen based on the questions that participants can make through the Q&A dot that you will find in the bottom of your screen. You can write down the question and we will get back to you. Speakers will answer at the end of the presentation. This meeting will be recorded. This is for your knowledge. And then we go now to the opening remarks. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Acevedo, President of UAE, President of the Global Business Coalition, for the opening remarks. Mr. Acevedo.
Thank you, Fernando. Dear friends and colleagues from the Argentinian and Saudi Arabia business community, as President of the UAE, I proudly welcome this B20 Global Dialogue between Saudi Arabia and Argentina. This community is of vital importance not only for international economic welfare, for building the groundwork or worldwide rules-based economic relationship between nations, but also for our national business sector environment, which is expectant of creating a better and smarter integration with world markets. We are all facing difficult times because of the COVID-19 is causing a health and economic crisis as we have not seen before. It arrives in an adverse economic context worse than the 2008 crisis and attacks the real economy. Facing this crisis calls for coordinated actions, not only at a local level between business and governments, but also at the international spheres where business coalitions such as ours, international organisms, and high-level governmental forums such as the G20 need to speak to each other and find global solutions to counterback the pandemic. This is why I believe it is a good opportunity to get the recommendations made by the Saudi Arabia process of the B20 to the Argentinian business community and government authorities. When almost 2 years ago, we received a huge number of high-level representatives of the business community worldwide in Argentina, we were facing one of our recurrent crises. But we continued working on with my colleague, former B20 chair and friend Daniel Funes de Rioja, and we will do that again, no? But we has been a part of this B20 since Seoul 2010. We believe that B20 is an excellent opportunity to build the consensus to determine the foundations of economic development in the years to come and to make sure that the voice of the developing countries can be heard. In this occasion, we have agreed with the Saudi Arabia B20 chair to present the recommendations for 4 task forces: integrity and compliance, future of work and education, trade, investment and energy, sustainability and climate. The importance of these forums for UAE is crucial. In France, 2011, the Global Business Coalition was founded as an alliance of business federation to provide continuity to such endeavor. Through the GBC, which I'm honored to be president, we have been the network partner in several tracks to the B20 process and will continue to support the advancement to policy recommendation. Now, I will give the word to the B20 Sherpa, Dr. Abdulwahab Al-Sadoun, then to the Mr. Ambassador Jorge Argüello. Before that, we will proceed with the recommendation of the 4 selected task forces. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sir, good morning, and to you, our friends in Argentina. Good morning to my colleagues here in Saudi Arabia. I'd like to start by thanking Mr. Miguel Acevedo for hosting us today. And I'd like also to extend a special thanks and appreciation for His Excellency Ambassador Jorge Argüello, the G20 Argentina Sherpa, for joining us, and we are looking forward to hearing his wisdom later on. I'd like also to take this opportunity to extend a special thanks for my colleagues from the B20 Saudi Arabia who are participating in today's event, namely Mr. Madad Al-Ajmi, the chair of the task force for integrity and compliance, Ziyad Al-Shiha, the deputy chair for the trade and investment task force, Paddy, the deputy chair for the energy, sustainability and climate, and last but not least, Mr. Martin Umaran, the co-chair of the Future of Work and task force. I'm truly honored to serve this year as the Sherpa for the B20 Saudi Arabia, the voice of the private sector to the G20. In this role, I oversee the development of critical policy recommendation around key issues impacting global business today. Our overarching goal at the B20 is straightforward: deliver policy recommendation to the G20 that advance the strength and viability of all businesses, small, medium, and large, and the communities and ecosystem which they serve. The G20 and B20 presidency of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 2020 is both an enormous responsibility and an excellent opportunity to impact the discussion and the deliberation between the G20 leaders at a critical time for the global economy. Our presidency of the B20 at the year 2020 comes at a time like no other in modern history. when the world is facing the urgent need to unite the efforts of political leaders and cooperate in the face of current COVID-19 crisis. It is our opinion that cooperation and collaboration between governments, international organizations, civil society, and businesses is the only way to achieve an effective and timely resolution to this pandemic. As the voice of the business to the G20, or the global business to the G20, we believe we are uniquely positioned to identify solutions to ensure business continuity and support society at large. And to do so, we will need the insight and support of organizations like yours. We're organized at B20 Saudi Arabia by 6 task forces and the Women in Business Action Council, all of which contribute knowledge, expertise, and resources toward achieving our collective goals. And we're proud of the geographical and gender diversity we've established this year. This includes 16 members and 2 co-chairs from Argentina across our task forces and action council. And in addition, we've struck a record in having a women representation, which is 33.5%, a global benchmark after Argentina, which was in the tune of 28%. And it is our opinion that partnership like the one that we have with UIA are critical during these challenging times, and we're grateful to be joining you today. When we started our journey last December, we identified our priority issues for the global business community. And at that time, the COVID-19 was not in the picture. Since then, the world has changed, and we had to quickly adapt to this new challenge. And in response, the B20 established our COVID-19 initiative to address the impact of the pandemic in the business world. As a direct result of our initiative efforts, we released in early July a special report to the G20, which outlined a 6-point plan to address both the health and commercial aspect of our societies. It is also meant to prepare for the recovery phase of the pandemic around the world. As we look into the lessons learned from the current situation, we all recognize that government cannot face current and future challenges alone. We all have a stake in collaborative thinking and action. Uncertainty will remain for some time with us. However, the step businesses have already taken to redesign operating models and build resilience will be valuable in confronting a potential second wave of the virus. That said, while these COVID-19 recommendations address the short-term impact, we cannot lose sight of the long-term issues the world must prepare for now. These are addressed through the policy recommendation from our 6 task forces and action council, which we will submit to the G20 leaders during our B20 summit scheduled for October 26, 27 in Riyadh. My B20 colleagues here today will present more details of the policy recommendation that had been formulated and we are pursuing in the following areas: trade and investment, energy sustainability and climate, future of work and education, and last but not least, integrity and compliance. I thank you once again for the opportunity to join you today and look forward to our discussion later this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Sadoun. Thank you for all your efforts throughout the B20 Saudi Arabia process and for your very clear message. We will now proceed to listen to the message of B20 Argentina Sherpa, Ambassador Argüello. There's some problem with
organizing this. It is a pleasure for me to participate in this B20 virtual global dialogue. I would like to thank B20 Saudi Arabia and Unión Industrial Argentina for organizing this meeting at such a crucial moment for our economies, our society, and for humanity. I believe that this year the G20 has a key role and a greater responsibility in addressing today's global health and economic crisis and in leading the way towards a new world. Let me begin by saying, as you all know, that we are facing the deepest recession in peacetime history in the last 150 years. But the effects have not been equal. Some countries have been hit far more deeply and harshly than others. Some businesses and some people have also been hit far harder than others since their activities depend on close physical contact or due to their age or skills. For that reason, in my view, the motto which has inspired the B20 this year, Transforming for Inclusive Growth, is perhaps even more relevant today than it was at its inception. The world after COVID-19 is unlikely to return to the world as it was before. Many trends that were already ongoing in the global economy are now being accelerated by the impact of the pandemic. This is especially true for the digital economy. Remote working and learning, telemedicine, delivery services, online payments, remote entertainment are now the new normal. The future of work has arrived faster too, along with its challenges, many of them potentially multiplied. Other structural changes may also hasten, including regionalization of supply chains and a further explosion of cross-border data flows. The pandemic outbreak showcased the risks of a single source dependency and poor flexibility to adapt supply chains to shocks. It will take time for our economies and labor markets to recover, and they will likely emerge transformed. As history has shown, choices made during crisis can shape the world for decades to come. Crisis is the ideal time to take advantage from the lessons learned and become more resilient for the upcoming unknown world. What will remain critical is the need for collective action to build economies that deliver inclusive growth, prosperity, and safety for all. COVID-19 is testing global cooperation, as well as the relevance of multilateralism and its capacity to identify appropriate measures to navigate the crisis that has magnified inequalities between countries and within them. That is precisely what you at the B20 have been discussing. And I'm greatly confident that the set of recommendations that you will present to the leaders of the G20 will highlight the way forward to a more inclusive world. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure.
Thank you very much. We will now proceed to the discussion on the policy recommendations. They will be, as mentioned, presented by the leadership for each task force. I remind you that you can send your questions pressing the Q&A button. Let me first introduce Mr. Mahad Al-Sami, General Counsel at Saudi Telecom and Chair for the Integrity and Compliance Task Force, whom I had the pleasure to cooperate as co-chair for this said task force. It is very significant that we start with integrity and compliance, as we believe it is very fundamental for development and growth, and particularly in these challenging times. Mahad, my friend, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Fernando. It is my great pleasure actually to thank Mr. Miguel as well as the Mr. Ambassador for the excellent, I would say, remarks. And let me also thank, all of my colleagues in the B20, led by Dr. Abdulwahab Al-Sadoun for giving us this kind of an opportunity to speak to our counterparts in the UIA from Argentina, and also, to present the work that has been done throughout, the last, I would say, 8 months or so. So thanking you again, and I will take you through actually some of the, I would say, recommendations that we actually concluded with one of the priorities of the B20, which is the integrity and compliance. I'll share with you first the composition of the team that has been actually formed, representing individuals from all of the G20 countries. So it is absolutely was comprehensive to the extent that we do have actually members from all of the G20s, except one country only that we could not actually get any representation, namely Indonesia. So we are actually a total of 107 members. We've been actually cooperating into the discussions and the priorities that we have actually identified at the beginning. One of the major, I would say, goal and objective for us to be extremely inclusive and make sure that we actually get all of the views from all of our members that has been selected in the task force. And also, as noted by Dr. Abdulwahab, that participation of women in developing our recommendations has been absolutely critical. And I'm proud to share that 39% of the integrity and compliance task force members are women. We actually comprise also of about 90% individuals from all of the G20 countries, and 10% represent the host country, which is Saudi Arabia. So if we can go, please, to the next slide. Just to have some kind of a focus of what we are trying to achieve within the integrity and compliance task force. So our main goal is to develop global solutions that can be extremely implemented by the G20, I would say, leaders, to also address issues of bad governance and corruptions. So we have actually focused on pursuing a culture of high integrity in public and private sectors. We also focused on leveraging emerging technologies to manage risks related to corruption and fraud. As all of you have seen, actually, even throughout the pandemic, that the necessity and the use of technology became extremely important to help not only governments but also private sector to fight corruption, detect any kind of violations, and so on and so forth. And one also of the priorities that we also focused on, and this is also has been also addressed by previous presidencies, including Argentina, is the public procurement and the transparency in relation to that. I will review just with you or just give you an overview of each recommendation and just give you some kind of a sense of what are the actions that we have actually reached to make sure that these kind of priorities and recommendations are going to be easy to implement and also have some kind of a sustainability piece that can truly benefit the countries throughout the coming years. So if we can go next, please, to the first recommendation. As I mentioned, I mean, we are actually encouraging the G20 leaders to pursue a culture of integrity in public and private sectors. I mean, this is absolutely generic when it comes to the recommendation itself, but we have actually focused into certain actions that needs to be taken in consideration to achieve that kind of a public and private partnership that we are actually promoting for. So we are asking, the G20, I would say, leaders to consider actually going into the current national anti-corruption plans and look into it collectively with the private sector to ensure a culture of high integrity is adopted, as well as that it is not going to be only just certain, I would say, amendments here and there, but it's a collective action among the private and the governments to make sure that the private sector input and expertise are considered when revisiting these kind of anti-corruption national plans. As you all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has made this need even more critical, as we deal with stimulus packages, emergency funding, and support of government plans. And all of these kind of initiatives that comes from the government, it is normally associated with certain, I would say, corruption activities that needs to be actually dealt with, not only at the time of the pandemic, but also in the other, I would say, times that we even after the pandemic is going to be concluded, hopefully soon. We also just focused that we can give also the recommendation to the G20 leaders that they must also establish new channels of communication with the private sector. Regarding too many, I would say, aspects of fighting corruption, but more specifically on whistleblower, I would say, protections, as we see that there are gaps that needs to be addressed when it comes to protecting, the individuals who are raising the concerns in relation to certain corruption activities. Lastly, in this kind of a recommendation, we identified that women suffer a particularly negative impact from corrupt, I would say, conduct further that is hindering, their political representation and opportunities for leadership. We are asking, the G20 leaders that they must accelerate the focus on gender-based considerations and identify certain solutions. If we go, please, to the next slide, I will also give you an overview about, our second recommendation and policy action, which is, as I briefly mentioned, is focusing on the emerging technologies. We believe in applying information and communication technologies in order to reduce opportunities for sure for corruption. Also enhance effectiveness and efficiency in the public and private sector, strengthen the transparency and increase the public interest. You can just, notice that these are, in a way or another, generic, I would say, terms that is going to be a bit difficult to address in more concrete, I would say, actions. And that's why we try to sharp, the actions that can truly help, us to achieve the objective of introducing this technology. So we went and dig deeper and made sure that, we come up with certain actions that can be actually adopted by the G20 leaders, namely adopt a consistent, what we call it, digital identity standards and systems to enhance transparency. Develop certain national digital public registers to increase the transparency around beneficial ownership and third-party risk management. We also just came up with some kind of an initiative to launch a public-private partnership project to support the development of new technologies to future improve the data quality and data sharing and national registers. We have seen throughout, the discussions with all of our colleagues in the task forces that they are extremely promoting for certain solutions that can truly not only, help, governments to fight, certain corruption activities, but also the private sector, which is extremely important to achieve the measures that we are trying to put and limit, the risks of being exposed to corruption activities. Last but not least is the third recommendation, and my co-chair, Mr. Fernando, played an excellent, I would say, role in developing this kind of a recommendation. And we tried to focus into the matters that has not been extremely focused on in the previous presidencies. And as you all know, given the cost of public procurement activities is actually borne by all citizens, and governments are expected, in our view, to ensure that this spending is carried out both, for sure, efficiently and by following high standards of conduct. We believe that this is critical to achieve delivery of quality services while safeguarding the interests of all stakeholders. We try to focus to also include certain, I would say, actions that can be actually implemented by ensuring transparency and promote accountability across the entire public procurement and life cycle, establish clear and consistent incentives to reward high standards of ethical businesses conduct in the context of public, I would say, procurement. We believe that this can actually encourage businesses to be more, I would say, transparent when it comes to dealing with the public procurement. We also recommend to ensure greater integrity amongst public procurement officials, because we believe that these kind of information and data that is associated with public procurement officials can truly help the transparency of the whole process, and truly can limit any kind of activities that can actually expose the government as well as the businesses to certain corruption activities. The adoption, in our view, of these recommendations is good for businesses and future of global, for sure, economies. I have just recently had even the discussion with the chairman of the Anti-Corruption Action Council, who was extremely supportive to such initiatives, because it is, in a way or another, integrate with the recommendations that the Action Council for the Anti-Corruption Group is promoting for, which is going to actually give us an excellent edge when it comes to promoting these kind of recommendations with the G20 leaders. We believe it will enable actually greater collaboration between the public and the private sector, because it's very important to work together to come up with the solution and also the actions under each single recommendation, because it is, we believe it's going to help the governments to accelerate the anti-corruption national plans, and also make it extremely consistent with what the businesses are doing. Here is just the end of my, I would say, presentation, and I truly welcome the discussion and the questions in relation to our work, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mathad. As many participants are aware, the following speaker, Mr. Martin Umaran, aside from being one of the founding partners of Globant, which is one of our Argentine unicorns, was in fact Deputy Chair for Employment and Education in the 2018 B20 Argentina cycle, and has continued his involvement now as co-chair for the Future of Work and Education Task Force for B20 Saudi Arabia. So, Martin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Fernando. And thank you, the B20 Saudi Arab organization, for giving me the opportunity to be part of the task force and to share this policy recommendation to the Argentina G20 and to the country whole business community. I want to especially thank to Fernando and Daniel Funes de Rioja, who have helped me out, through this process, which is very strange for us. We are not used to take part of this type of, of processes. We are more the entrepreneur type, but we learned the importance of being part of this, With Globant, we have been participating in the B20 since the Argentina chapter in 2018. It was amazing, to be part of this, and to share what we know more about the world is about the digital revolution that we are living, and how this is changing the world we live. During this process, Dr. Ilham Mansour has been an amazing chair. Definitely, she ran the process great and letting everyone voice their opinions and putting together a great document. The task force has an equal gender representation, and its members come from multi-diverse geographies and economic realities. I believe that the document shows this diversity. So let me get into the objective of the task force. I'm not going to go through the statement word by word, but I think it was clear what we were trying to achieve. You know, in 2017, the B20 created this task force. You know, the Future of Work and Education Task Force, as a continuation of the Employment Task Force. I think that this was a fantastic idea. New technologies are challenging the way we work, and therefore we need to adapt education and labor systems to the new order. There's no way that we can put together education and labor. As the objective of the task force states, the largest challenge is to find solutions at the same time for the young people entering into the labor market and for a population that is living a longer life. This is really a big challenge for the world that's coming. You know, we started the task force in February in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, and a few weeks later, the pandemic, you know, hit the process, you know, as a tsunami, and we need to address this new reality. You know, Churchill said that never waste a good crisis, and I think this crisis was a catalyst for all the things that we were doing in the task force. I think this task force has to address what's happening in the labor market and education market in the middle of the crisis, and that was fantastic. You know, affecting the way we work, we deal, we study, we live. The task force had to work very hard to make recommendations that take care of this new normality. Can you go to the next one? Yeah, thank you. So we work to produce 3 recommendations and 9 policy actions. The first one refers to the pandemic and how to tackle this global crisis. You know, we never imagined at the very beginning that we needed to address this, but definitely we did it, and the recommendation one shows, you know, what you need to implement to make the recovery faster and safer, which is 2 very important things at this moment. The second one refers on the importance of promoting small, medium enterprises and entrepreneurship. The group discussed how states can remove barriers and how to facilitate new endeavors. The jobs of the future will come from companies that don't exist today. So we really need to work hard to produce this new framework for the companies and entrepreneurs. Finally, a recommendation regarding the narrow link between employability and education systems. Technology is disrupting at light speed the way we work and live, and of these new technologies to upgrade the education system is an important point in this recommendation. So wrapping up this last recommendation is that to address the new world, we need to use the new tools that technology is providing us. If we can put that 2 things together, everything is going to be much easier. If we try to address the new reality with very old tools, it's going to be very difficult to make it happen. So we think that this last recommendation is very, very important, and we know that touch a lot of different things, but we need to work very hard to make this happen. The basic goal, of the B20 Saudi Arabia is transforming for inclusive growth. We think, and that was the pivot idea of the task force. As you can see here, the group recommendations are fully aligned with the G20 priorities of empowering people, safeguarding the planet, and shaping new frontiers. Transforming for inclusive growth is a fantastic vision to be deployed in our country. So I think that this guideline could be used for that purpose, and we love the idea of working together with both public and private sector to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think it was a very excellent summary. I'm sure people may have questions to further your presentation. Please just a reminder that you can type them in the Q&A button, and so we'll answer them later. Trade and investment now is one of the most significant task forces for us, particularly at this time, as the ones that we presented before, of course. But UIA was significantly involved in this one by leading the Global Business Coalition, who was the network partner of the task force. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ziyad Al-Shiha, Deputy Chair for Trade and Investment and former President and CEO of Saudi Electricity. Ziyad fought very hard to allow us to make progress on a very challenging proposition and a very difficult context. Ziyad, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Fernandez. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for providing us with this great opportunity to be part of this Argentinian events with a beautiful country, rich of culture, great people, great scenery, and fine wine and dine and culture of richness. So truly thank you and pleasure to be here. Let me start by saying that your effort, Fernando, was a great part of this. So you were not only on the task force of the previous task force, but you represented very well the Global Business Coalition, as well as making sure that their voices is heard within our task force. So truly thank you. And I will show exactly where your contribution came big time as part of this presentation. Let's move to the next slide, please. Again, like other task forces, probably we have, if not the largest, one of the largest task forces represented from east, west, north, and south from the entire globe, with chaired by Ms. Lubna Al-Ayyan, one of the most conglomerate business people here in the kingdom, and a global business, recognized global business leader, along with our great co-chairs and deputy chairs who come with solid business experience from across the globe that represented all of the task force. Let me also mention that the entire task force has been so instrumental in providing their input within our policy papers. Next slide, please. Again, this is just to give you a glimpse of the 20 countries that are represented and beyond. We have 133 task force, and this is the split of where they come from, to show that all countries have been included. And again, 3 people from the Argentine, but it's basically representing the large segments of the business community. Let's move on, please. Like our colleagues have been saying in their introduction, I think the Trade and Investment Task Force, we can draw a lot of similarities between it and the pandemic. While the pandemic really is from the bad side and the spread of virus and disease, Trade and Investment Task Force shows that one country alone cannot do it. It takes the entire globe to work together to create value for all of the countries that we're talking about. So if a country decided just they want to close themselves or play in an unfair way with other countries, it just doesn't work. Similar Unfortunately, with the pandemic that we have been seeing, that no country can fight this alone, and the spread of this virus, unless we all come together, I think we cannot be as effective as we should. This is exactly the analogy of trade and investment, that all countries have to come together and play in a level playing field with a fair practices to make it together. So all the world can truly, truly make it together. Next slide. And the only number I can quote out of this slide is basically maybe 4 numbers, or 2 numbers to be specific. The first number is the world stand to gain between $5 to $6 trillion if we together can make it. If we together can improve, cut the red tapes, and play in a level playing field, we can together stand to achieve close to $5 to $6 trillion of trade exchange. And that will translate to not less than $8 to $10 trillion in GDP and local production of products and goods locally. So you can see what the world together can do. This is incremental of what the already existing practices that we have today. So this is a great and wonderful, wonderful opportunity that brings jobs and brings a lot of opportunities for the entire countries and the globe. Next slide, please. These are the 4 pillars or the 4 recommendations that we have done. The first one is to tackle the multilateral system. The second one is to tackle the e-commerce, and the third one is the services and trade finance. And the fourth is sustainable trade and basically investment. So those are the 4 elements or 4 pillars or 4 recommendations that, that our policy paper has. Let's start with the first one. Next slide. Let me start with the multilateral system. This is to, we have agreed within the policy paper and the task force to establish a high-level working group out of the business community. We think and we thought that if we just leave it to government, things will just take forever to get established and done or deliberated on. So we had really the consensus and agreement to establish a high-level working group to basically give advice to how the WTO need to be reformed and also done. And also pledge to the standstill and rollback of protectionism. So we're saying enough putting more protection measures. And I think the COVID virus did stretch our testing to see that how negatively it can impact the collaboration among states, among companies globally. And then enforce and advance the multilateral, basically, rule book to ensure a global level playing field. Out of this slide, maybe I will just mention the first one, which is the big element or big item on our agenda, which is the reforming the WTO. I think, Mr. Fernando, if you recall, you were very instrumental representing the business community and very, very vocal about it. So we have agreed basically to improve the WTO effectiveness and basically to review all the current practices and be transparent about the subsidies that the world is doing or the government are doing to support their companies. But I will single out, as I said, the reforming of the WTO, and would like just to assure Mr. Fernando Landa, because he was very instrumental about it, that the working group of the trade and investment, which is our shadow within the G20, have already working on the Riyadh initiative, taking your comments and your colleagues' comments to assure you that they have been echoing very, very well, and there will be the working group of the Riyadh initiative to target specifically the reform of the WTO. Let's move to the next slide. The second one is basically to target e-commerce. We have all seen the surge in e-commerce and e-platforms application given the pandemic that took place, and there are great opportunities. Now, this can even further flourish. It can even further add value to the whole entire globe if we allow it to further flourish, if we allow, again, the movement of products, if we agree on the taxation, and maybe agree to extend the moratorium on the taxation of digital services and so on. There are 2 elements to e-commerce. One is basically to empower it, again, remove all the obstacles to make it flourish and bring more products and make it more easily to exchange products globally. The second one is to implement the electronic data, so that you make it very transparent for countries, for those who want to do business, for example, in Argentina or Saudi Arabia or in other parts of the world, so that there is an index or indexation of countries of adapting the e-platform. And this will definitely, like our colleague Mud'ad mentioned, is to fight basically corruption. If things are available on the net, or available on this is the application, I think that automatically eliminate basically a lot of the human intervention and make it level playing field for everybody. So e-commerce in two folds. One is to be transparent, or use it to be transparent, and two, basically to foster that exchange of product globally. Let's move to the next slide, please. And that is to do basically with services. And I would probably pick one element or major element here, basically the facilitation of investment, or facilitation of financing, shall I say, and insurance for the MSMEs. While big companies, big conglomerates, could it be family owned or publicly listed companies, they do enjoy the access to facilitation of finance globally or domestically. However, for MSMEs, I think it's exactly the opposite, especially after Basel III. I think what we're saying there need to be a process of asking the right questions, so that we can facilitate and have the MSMEs have the ability to access both insurance and access to finance, so that they can accomplish their business not only domestically, but even when they go abroad. The passport that led by our Sherpa team, and that was already addressed here, I think is a simple and great example of what MSMEs and the small business can do, or if given the chance, whenever they go to another country, that they are recognized. Of course, we have to implement the right platform and the right recognition for them to be recognized by the decision makers in that country, to allow them to enter and penetrate the market easily once they have passed those tests or standard tests that I think the passport is calling for. Next, the last pillar, please. Next slide. This is on sustainable trade and investment. And I think my colleague Paddy here will cover that even more when it comes to the environmental aspect on it, as they have done a wonderful job. But I thought here we have done it from the investment and again, the opportunities. Every time environment gets discussed, it just antagonize some people, and there is a lot of fight, disagreement over it. We thought, let us focus on the great things that bring us all together, which is what? Which is basically investment, and allowing the investment in green energy to be to go within globally. If you do that and cut the red tapes and create the right standards and be very transparent, guess what? There's only one way to go, which is the growth, which is creating jobs, which is allowing facilitation of finance, trade, and investment to happen in this clean technology that we are talking about, in support of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So we took that element that I think all of us, the entire community and world agree on, is invest in green, reap the benefit of basically saving the environment, as well as creating jobs, foster trading between countries, and do more of that. As I said, Mr. Paddy Menton, he will mention that in his maybe, or elaborate more when it comes to the environmental. As I said, they have done a wonderful job in that thing. The last slide that I have here, we did, next slide please. We did stress test our policy paper to what happened today in the pandemic. We said, okay, if there was a desire to do all what we said before the pandemic, let's stress test it to see, does it work during the pandemic and after the pandemic? And guess what? The true stress test that we realized is that if we were maybe out of a scale of 100, like 80% convinced that that's what we should do, after the pandemic, I think we are 200% convinced that these are the pillars and the things that we need to do more of, so that we can help the world come together, help the world expand its trading, help the world create more jobs, meaningful jobs, and help the investment facilitation the trade facilitation, the finance facilitation, the insurance facilitation, and expanding e-commerce, and so on. So with that, I think I conclude my presentation, and I said, let's just focus on the figure that I just mentioned, which is 5 to 6 trillion increased trade, 8 to 10 trillion of increased GDP above and beyond what has already been accomplished. With that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ziyad, and thank you in particular for your kind words. Your presentation was very clear, and I'm sure people will be enticed to read the whole documents. Now, for Argentina, this next task force is very significant. Argentina has in Vaca Muerta a very important asset for our future development. But at the same time, 2020 was the definition of a perfect storm, starting with the severe oil price crisis, following with the COVID-related demand drop. But also it makes us reflect about sustainability and the environment. So planning ahead and policy definitions, if anything, have never been more relevant. Mr. Padmanabhan, President and CEO of Aqua Power, a Deputy Chair for Energy, Sustainability and Climate, will walk us through the recommendations to the G20. Mr. Padmanabhan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Landa. Honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, right at the outset, I also want to thank you all for sharing your valuable time for joining us today at this event. It's my pleasure and privilege to present to you the policy recommendations that have been formulated by the Energy, Sustainability and Climate Task Force of the B20 for consideration by the G20, of course. So the Energy, Sustainability and Climate Task Force is comprised of an impressive group of, I think you need to move the slides, please. A very impressive group of world-renowned international business leaders, supported by 114 task force members, mostly from the G20 countries, but even from other countries, who are all experts in the fields of energy, sustainability, and climate-related matters. Under the Saudi presidency, as you have already heard from our Sherpa, B20 has made concerted efforts to ensure high representation and engagement of women across all the task force, and no difference. In our task force, we were privileged to have 27.7% of the members, women members, and a very solid global representation. So 21% members from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and 79, nearly 80% from the rest of the world, as I say, mainly from the G20 countries. If you can move on, moving to the subject matter itself, the focus of the Energy, Sustainability and Climate Task Force has been to address the key issues around reducing carbon emissions, including the sustainable use of resources, actions to ensure security and access to potable water, and establish durable infrastructure necessary to sustain all of these objectives while fostering sustainable economic growth for both developed and the developing world. The COVID-19 pandemic serves as a reminder of how critical resilience is. It is clear that we must strive to build resilience in a post-COVID-19 world focused on public healthcare and beyond. So public sector leaders can leverage the post-COVID-19 recovery actions to progress the green agenda through such actions as emphasis on renewable energy, low emission transport, and on increasing energy efficiency. For the private sector, COVID-19 recovery agenda presents the opportunity to build resilience in their business models by embedding sustainability, reducing emissions, boosting supply chain resilience, and investing in low emission portfolios. The task force has formulated 4 policy recommendations. If you can move on to the first one. The first is to commit to action towards carbon neutrality. Carbon mitigating technologies, energy efficient processes, and circular economy concepts are critical and central for achieving carbon neutrality. There has been no disagreement on the subject. We therefore urge G20 members to accelerate the deployment of existing low emissions and emissions neutral technologies, and to scale nature-based solutions and not to leave them behind. We also believe that the development and scalability of emissions neutral technology is critical to enable commercial viability. The G20 should also foster innovation to facilitate a shift towards a circular carbon economy and propose circular practices to lower emissions and optimize material extraction and production. Our second policy recommendation is to provide predictable, effective policy framework to achieve carbon neutrality. Achieving carbon neutrality and sustained economic growth can only be achieved if the many policy levers needed are activated together jointly. In addition to the need for promotion of technology and innovation included in the first recommendation, predictable and effective economy-wide policy frameworks must also be implemented. The G20 should also drive carbon pricing in local markets, albeit according to national circumstances, and take action to phase out the inefficient use of fossil fuels. And G20 should also drive the adoption of climate risk disclosure by businesses. Overarching all this, G20 members should introduce effective national public programs to ensure a just transition for the hard-to-abate sectors, the SMEs, the workers, and the vulnerable groups who, without such concerted effort, could well get left behind. Our third policy recommendation is to strengthen climate-resilient infrastructure. From serving our most basic needs to enabling our most ambitious ventures in trade or technology, infrastructure services support our well-being and economic growth. Reliable water, sanitation, energy, transport, and telecommunication services are universally recognized as critical for raising the quality of life of people. Access to infrastructure services is also a central factor in the productivity of firms and thus the entire economies, making it a key enabler of economic development. In a time period of climate change and intensifying natural hazards, infrastructure systems are under pressure to deliver resilient and reliable services. Considering the vulnerability of infrastructure across sectors to climate change, G20 members should facilitate rigorous risk assessment of vulnerability of infrastructure to climate change impacts. They should also introduce frameworks and principles for climate resilient infrastructure and strengthen access to financing for climate resilient infrastructure development and upgrades. Climate resilient infrastructure will be vital to minimize losses of lives, asset damage, and disruption of economic activity as natural hazards and other impacts resulting from climate change strike, thereby making the economies and societies as a whole more resilient. Our fourth and final recommendation is to promote the sustainable use of freshwater systems and the oceans. Water is the basis of life on our planet, and it is vital for economic activity. More than 40% of global jobs are heavily dependent on fresh water. Ocean-based industries alone contribute an estimated $1.5 trillion, 2.5% of global GVA, and provide the primary livelihood to many coastal communities. This critical environmental and socioeconomic resource is facing immense risk right across the globe. To protect our freshwater systems and the oceans, G20 should first promote water quality and responsible usage by leveraging better conservation and water management policies and promoting innovation for a water-smart economy. Secondly, ensure sustainable and clean water access for all by leveraging financing vehicles and targeted investments. And thirdly, introduce policies at the national and international level to safeguard the oceans for sustainable economic growth. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to joining my colleagues in answering any questions you may have. Fernando, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patnanahan. We have a few minutes for questions before proceeding to the closing remarks. So I will start. I have some questions of my own. If you believe that you need to send at a later stage, please do send us by email the questions and we will answer them for sure. So I have a few questions, particularly, let me start with Martha. I would like to, for people to know what other initiatives other than the document task force has the Integrity and Compliance Task Force pursue. I think that it should be clear to the audience that the relevance of this task force is to achieve global standards that are applicable across jurisdictions and to leverage technology in order to do this. But I think that in particular during this cycle, there are several documents that have been issued and pursued and initiatives and new initiatives. So Mathar, if you want to comment on this.
Absolutely, Fernando. I mean, there were too many, I would say, initiatives that was actually pursued by the task force members as well as myself when it comes to actually have certain statements as well as, you know, certain collaboration with international bodies that are actually keen to promote anti-corruption activities, like, for example, the World Economic Forum, the International Chamber of Commerce, Basel Institute of Governance. We had several sessions actually to promote the work that we've been actually working on for all of these, I would say, you know, months. The advocacy piece was extremely important because, as you all know, that, you know, without the real reach out to the businesses, the important stakeholders who can promote and also agree into some of the recommendations that we are promoting for, we believe that this is something that can truly benefit, you know, the outcome of the task force itself. We come up with certain joint, I would say, statements that is going to be also published very soon. There is a joint statement that is right now underway with the United Nations Drugs and Corruption and Fighting Corruption Office. That is also targeting certain, I would say, elements when it comes to fighting corruption, specifically at the time of the pandemic. We found that there are too many, I would say, lessons learned and also, you know, certain recommendations that can truly help, you know, governments as well as private sectors to fight corruption throughout, you know, these kind of difficult situations. So the advocacy, collaboration with other, I would say, international bodies was extremely important for us, and we are continuing to do that. There will be too many, I would say, you know, advocacy efforts from the task force itself that can elaborate and also explain, you know, the recommendations and make sure that, you know, we do have buy-in from all of the interested stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Martin. Martin, I think that, for Argentina, we need to somehow reflect on the new opportunity that we may have in terms of employment and education with this new normality. Can you give us some thoughts on this?
Oh, thank you, Fernando. I think that Argentina is developing very interesting capabilities in terms of in the new digital economy. You know, there are some companies like Globant or Mercado Libre, Despegar, and other ones that are definitely taking advantage of this new reality. Based on that, we can have an advantage if we accelerate the process of transforming our companies into digital companies. for entrepreneurship. We have good entrepreneurship, but we need to provide a framework for that. If not, I think that it's going to be quite difficult to grow that to grow that companies. We need to build companies. We need to work together with current companies and industries that that we have companies like Tenaris or other companies that are more traditional manufacturers that working together with the new digital companies or the new economy companies. I think that it's a very good platform to develop the country. We need to be. It's like we need to provide the new capabilities. In the B20 document and recommendations, we say a lot about the importance of letting entrepreneurship to flourish, in this economy, to remove barriers, and to foster education in the new technologies. So having the tradition, having the industry base that we have in Argentina, we're in a very good position to foster that. I think if we can put all these things together and remove some barriers, we can definitely grow a lot these new opportunities.
Thank you very much, Martin. There is a question for the Energy and Sustainability and Climate Task Force. It relates to the impact of COVID-19 in this sense. How can we assess, or what can you reflect about this, the impact of COVID-19 in this dimension?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. A great question. In fact, we in the task force also debated the reality of COVID-19, the situation where the world has come to. While COVID-19 has been terribly tragic, and the impact all of us are only now starting to understand the depth of it, the general conclusion of this of our team was that, in fact, this presented the rebuilding, the emergence out of the crisis has given us an opportunity to rebuild better and to rebuild in an inclusive way, and very much feeding into ensuring environmental sustainability and greening the economy, using the opportunity that we have in order to recover from the crisis. There was general consensus that everybody understood and recognized that infrastructure investment often allows us to lead the recovery process. And here is a perfect platform on which now to rebuild in an inclusive way and ensure that it is environmentally responsible and climate mitigating solutions are implemented. So, the recovery of COVID-19 gives us that opportunity. And there was a lot of acceptance that this is already starting to get factored in.
Thank you very much for this answer, Mr. Partner. Regarding trade and investment, as you mentioned, Ziyad, the WTO reform is no doubt one of the key dimensions of this task force. There are so many issues that were discussed. Particularly with the WTO reform, one of the issues, one of the dimensions, for example, was reviewing the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures. In your opinion, what are the issues, and you did mention the Riyadh initiative, what are the issues that should be further discussed or carried forward into the B20 Italy in terms of continuity? What are the issues that you see that need more discussion and involvement?
Thank you for the question. I think one major issue that need to continue, like we have been discussing, is the ultimate purpose is to create a level playing field between companies all over the world. From one side, there are some countries arguing that their development level gives them entitlement to some subsidies, entitlement to some special treaties, and so on. But I think the development level of a country is not one parameter. Within that country, there are sectors that are very well developed, and there are sectors that are medium, and sectors that are maybe not as developed as of that. Today, the decision is totally to the country to decide the level of development on the aggregate of all of its services, and hence they get those special treaties and subsidies and so on. I think what we are saying is to review that process of determining the level of development of that country within certain sector or groups of sectors, so that the level of entitlement, special subsidies or treatment or what have you, can be determined accordingly. Remember, at the end of the world, this is not for one country or one business to take advantage. This is about providing equal opportunity to all countries, all businesses around the world. Give them equal opportunity so that they can compete. And if you do that, you have more companies and more employment of people that can flourish, and pricing will stabilize and maybe help to improving efficiency in the pricing mechanism and so on. So I would definitely strongly recommend that the discussion about the level of development, establishing a criteria to determine the level of development for that particular country within a sector. So it doesn't go with either we are developed or non-developed kind of criteria. No, certain criteria so that you can be more informed and fairly and squarely assigning those subsidies or tariffs or not tariffs or subsidies or help as needed within the sector, or entitlement, shall I say.
Thank you very much, Ziyad. Very, very clear and very enlightening. We have now reached the time for closing remarks, and nobody would be more adequate and representative for the Argentine business community in this scenario than Dr. Funes de Rioja, former chair of B20 Argentina, vice president of UYA, and president of Sherpa Argentina. Daniel, you have the floor for the final comments.
Thank you, Fernando. Thanks a lot. Really a very interesting meeting. I appreciate a lot your comments. And my first remark is regarding the dialogue. I think that the dialogue between us has been taking a decade in building confidence between actors of different economies and backgrounds, and B20 is a testimony of that. We have always promoted institutionalized dialogue. In all the roles I have been honored to be, as you mentioned, and particularly as being the chair of B20 Argentina in 2018. And we were together since 2010, since Seoul, with all the actors and being part, and you are, Fernando, one of the key actors of the Global Business Coalition. And the continuity of this process is granted in here, and I appreciate that the Saudi Arabian effort in order to do so and to give continuity, even in these dramatic circumstances of the COVID-19. I sincerely want to say I appreciate that, and I think that is key, because I don't know what to enter in all the task forces, because you made really the four speakers an extraordinary summary of that. But as a member, I want to say that certainly this world has changed dramatically, and we need to be prepared to respond to the crisis. And you mentioned the word rebuilding, and I keep an eye on that word, because there are lessons learned, experience, and a common perception that inclusive growth is the main objective. And in order to do so, there are two other elements that I captured from your voices and your experiences during this Arab Saudi process. First, articulation. We need to articulate among us and with the governments. Certainly to try to convince the governments about strongly about our recommendations. We think that the private sector is key, is essential for the transformation of the world. This is a point of inflection, and we have a role to play. The other word is adaptability. Certainly, we are facing changes, and these changes that will be previous to the COVID-19, but as a consequence of this pandemic, certainly we will be influenced by that. Uncertainty and lack of trust are two reactions of our society. And we as business community, we need to reinforce our message regarding the building up strategy and to put this strategy at the G20 recommendations, strengthening in reforming multilateral system for an open and fair trade system, a better orientation in order to have an inclusive world in which greening the economy is a key aspect. And certainly we confirmed that during all this process. Also, the recovery opportunity give us a great occasion in order to better link education and employability. We are losing employment everywhere. And certainly, in order to respond to the new world and to the new challenges, we need to have a better link in between education and employability, as you did mention during your speeches, and create the conditions to invest, to growth, and to create jobs. And this is something that is at the heart of our message since 2010 and continue, but it's more relevant because we are much more convinced that we need to work together doing so. And certainly, and I conclude my remarks with this, I think that the effort made by your country, by yourself, giving us the possibility to discuss during this G20 process, even in the middle of such a pandemic, and such an impact in our economies, and such an impact in our social lives, is really extraordinary testimony that we need to continue doing so together. We appreciate this exchange of views, and we appreciate all the process. And certainly, we congratulate all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you for words. And for sure, if anything, the pandemic has demonstrated that despite the challenges of multilateralism, the world needs more cooperation rather than less cooperation. So clearly, we are on the right track on this. And if anything, B20 Saudi Arabia has showed us the way how to do so. And in this respect, I would like to turn to Dr. Al-Sadoun, our B20 Saudi Arabia Sherpa, for your final remarks.
Thank you, Fernando. Very much appreciate your effort in moderating the session. I think, we had listened to two wise Argentinian leaders, the opening and the closing. The opening by the G20 Argentina Sherpa, and the closing by Dr. Daniel Di Rijoya. I hope I did pronounce the name right. It goes without saying that there is a need for a closer collaboration and a continued collaboration between all of us, not only during this crisis, but even beyond the crisis. And we're confident that with continued collaboration, we will emerge even stronger with much lesson learned from the ongoing crisis. The effort that had been put by our colleagues, the member of the task forces, is phenomenal. Given that when the outbreak of the COVID-19, there had been a lockdown which had impacted mobility, but nevertheless, the good thing, the technology had been a key enablers. Without such an investment in infrastructure, we wouldn't be able to continue our journey. And luckily, we had switched, from physical meeting to virtual meeting, without really compromising on the quality of the policy recommendation, on the effort, on the fact that the B20 is a platform for knowledge sharing and also collaboration to come up with the right policy recommendation to the leader to address challenges and also explore opportunities for continued and sustainable growth for the business on a global level. So without further ado, I'd like once again to appreciate the UIA for hosting this meeting, and in particular a special thanks to our colleagues from Argentina. Their contribution to the task forces as task force member, as co-chair, Martin, is really much appreciated, and we would like to continue. Have it not been the COVID, we would be in Buenos Aires, joining you and sharing with you the policy recommendation that had been formulated by the task forces. And we hope to see you all in October. Hopefully the travel ban will be lifted by then, and we will have the opportunity to welcome you once again to Saudi Arabia. One of the key advantages for the B20 is having business leaders from the G20 countries and beyond, getting together, engaging, networking, and that on its own, is a merit that we nurture, and we would love to have it, later on in Saudi and even beyond Saudi in the future presidencies of the B20. So once again, thank you very much for the time, for the effort, for the commitment, and I'm confident that with such collaboration, we will emerge much stronger in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Sadoun. I can attest to the hospitality of Saudi Arabia and the B20 Secretariat, so thank you very much for your invitation. One point I want to mention, there has been some questions that were received after the deadline for Q&A, but we will respond to them for each and every one of them by email. So just wanted to clarify it on that point. To close our session, let me introduce B20 Argentina to Sherpa, Ambassador Pablo Tetamanti, who worked a long time during the G20 cycle in Argentina. It's a pleasure to introduce Ambassador Pablo Tetamanti, Secretary of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Fernando. It's a pleasure for me to see so many friendly faces after some time in this meeting. I wish to thank B20 Saudi Arabia and, of course, the Unión Industrial Argentina for hosting this event and inviting me to be part of it. This session has allowed us to be informed about policy recommendations developed by 4 of the 6 B20 task forces to address the challenges and strains posed by COVID-19. And indeed, in this unprecedented and uncertain times, you have been able to assess the diverse, complex, and severe circumstances that hit our economies and societies. As many of you have said, we are in a transition caused by this pandemic that, in a way, deepened some tendencies we had already detected, even in B20 before, accelerated transformations, and brought in some new challenges. This gives us an opportunity to rethink our responses and project new concepts to create a better business environment. And to this end, recommendations presented today by the B20 are of invaluable importance. Running the risk of seeming a little unjust, which is not my intention, I would like to stress, as an example, 3 important aspects of the B20 Trade and Investment and Future of Work and Education Task Force's policy recommendations. First, the B20 assessment of the current crisis highlighted one of the most worrying COVID-19 consequences, which is the exacerbation of inequalities. The pandemic worsened inequalities between countries and also within countries, particularly in relation to access to income, health, education, formal employment, internet, social protection, and public services, as some of you have mentioned before. I'm pleased to know that Trade and Investment and Future of Work and Education B20 Task Force's recommendations recognize the special situation of emerging, developing, and least developed countries, as well as vulnerable groups and sectors which are struggling to address the widespread impact of COVID-19. In this latter, it has included small and medium-sized enterprises and entrepreneurs who have a higher level of vulnerability and lower resilience to shocks. Hence, they were disproportionately hit compared with larger companies. A good example of what I am just mentioned is recommendation 2 of the task force on the future of work and education that calls for an enabling policy environment that allows entrepreneurs and small and medium-sized enterprises to thrive beyond this critical period through the promotion of education, entrepreneurship, of expanding access to digital infrastructure, or strengthening access and integration into the global value chains. Second, the assessment by T20 Trade, Investment and Future of Work Task Forces tackled both the traditional pressing issues and the new challenges and changes presented by COVID-19 on global supply chains, small and medium-sized enterprises and startups, labor markets, education approaches. One aspect of these recommendations, I would like particularly to highlight recommendation 1 of this task force. I would like to underscore is the call for urgent, long-awaited measures related to the rule-based multilateral trading system, the establishment of international rules on e-commerce, and ease of access for small and medium-sized enterprises to finance and digital infrastructure, inclusion and social protection of workers, bringing up-to-date learning approaches. Those measures were relevant and urgent before the current crisis, but now they have become critical due to the serious fallout of the pandemic on unemployment and underemployment rates, workers' income losses, interruption of learning for students without access to internet or digital devices, plummeted trade and investment disruption to supply chains for essential products. The third aspect I would like to underscore is that the B20 Task Force assessment only proved that this year B20 motto, transforming for inclusive growth, is as vital and urgent. For President of Argentina, Alberto Fernandez, this requires from us to focus on 3 pillars: global public health, social protection, and inclusive economic recovery. In this context, he stated at the extraordinary G20 Leaders Summit response to COVID-19, which will produce vaccines and treatment as a global public good. These were not just words. International cooperation, sharing knowledge, public-private endeavors, reaching the most in need are at the basis of recent announcement by the Argentine and Mexican governments to co-produce a coronavirus vaccine by the Swedish-British pharmaceutical group and scientists from the University of Oxford to be produced by private corporations and distributed through Latin America and made available at cost so as to reach everyone. This goes to prove that in spite of the extraordinary uncertainty, we can chart the pathway forward. Finally, allow me to express my congratulations to the B20 work. I am confident that it will be as useful a contribution to our leaders as it has always been. As many as you have said, we are building a new world. We all need to work together to face the old and new challenges and bring about significant changes that allow us to fulfill our promise of leaving no one behind. Thank you very much, and may I ask for all the best for the B20 Summit to take place in October, hopefully presential. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Damanti. We will make sure that the documents, all the good work that was done by the B20 Saudi Arabia reach your hands so that it can be considered for the discussion ahead. Of course, we would have liked to have time to also discuss finance and infrastructure and digitalization, and of course, the discussion on gender equality. It was also very important in the B20 cycle, but unfortunately we had a limited time for this endeavor, but we will make sure that everybody has documents and the highlights, and they can share the message accordingly. So thank you very much for the participation. We have a great turn on. We have more than 100 participants. So it was a very good meeting. Thank you all for the efforts, particularly from our friends in Saudi Arabia for reaching out to us in this manner. Thank you very much. Have a good day, good evening, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fernando.
Bye-bye.